Coin traders, how we doing? Thanks for joining me for the show. We're going to be looking at Binance Coin BNB on that ticker. Overall, extremely impressed right now with the overall shape of this chart. Still funny to say since we are in a bear market right now and we are still looking at a pretty good pullback right now, but we have seen BNB be one of the best performers in this bear market. So despite being down 63, almost 64% from the all-time high down to the ultimate low, we were looking at 74, almost 75%. And so even on this most recent rally before the recent FTX flush, that high that we got up to only would have put us down from about 43.5% from the all-time high, which is actually pretty crazy to think that despite this whole big bear market that we were looking at prices being only down about 43% from the all-time high. So unfortunately, right now, you don't have as much gain potential as a lot of other cryptos that have pulled back way more to the all-time high, but that also leaves a lot more room for a new all-time high to come in a lot quicker since we are looking at only about 174% to the upside right now from current prices, which right now are sitting at 256.8. So we are looking at the weekly chart right now and have a big resistance line that we are going to be looking at up overhead. So let's go ahead and draw this price line out, and it pretty much is going to come in right above the 260 line. So big thing about this line is that it's extremely relevant all the way since we started on the 2020-21 bull rally. So looking left, you can see we actually saw it as a big point of resistance, flipped it as support, and then on this pullback, basically found it as weekly closing support. So we can actually draw it a little bit lower so it does line up perfectly with that and still maintains support on all the other lines. So drawing that down does have it coming down to about 259.80. So we'll effectively call that right at the 260 mark, which is a very nice round number. Now, so looking a little bit more recent to the right, especially in recent times, found it as support on the recent bounce. So big point of support after finding it as initial support again, breaking below it, a little brief period of resistance. So now since we have flipped bearish below this price line again, looking at that on the current daily as being that big resistance point, which we will zoom in here and talk about for a second. But now, so I want to actually zoom out and pull up the log chart. So we are looking at the weekly right now, just because this overall weekly chart is still looking extremely nice as far as a longer term continuation pattern goes for this weekly on this log chart. So especially if you can see when we did have our initial run up and rally back in 2017, sort of similar patterns as like what we are pretty much experiencing. So we had our run up, basically had a long period of a pullback, ran up a little bit higher, set a new all-time high, but that's okay, pulled back. But overall, this is still a pretty good pattern of kind of like what we are expecting right now, where we overall haven't had too much going on. And on this log chart, it is a little bit more of that longer term continuation pattern before finding a nice breakout to the upside. And so especially now, since we have found our low and actually found even in this most recent pullback from the FTX flush, a higher low, this is pretty much same sort of scenario that we were looking at. So we found a low, ran up, found a little bit of a higher high, which unfortunately we didn't get in the current market, but ultimately pulled back, set a new higher low. And this was also in the face of a little bit more trauma since this was the COVID flush back in March of 2020. So as you can see, pairs very well and nicely with what's currently going on right now. And so the fact that we have made a little bit of a stair-step pattern right now is still a little bit more of that bullish sign, especially after having such a big FUD event and also then getting the scare of a lot of speculation that Binance was going to be the next exchange, or centralized exchange rather, that would become insolvent and actually go belly up like what we saw with FTX. But obviously that's not a factor we're talking about right now. And so I want to actually briefly flip over to the monthly chart because I do want to talk about how we haven't really had enough time to get a long track record for this 50-period EMA on the monthly. But even on this pullback, we are still holding a higher support on top of this 50-period EMA. But right now, we are looking at, on the monthly, this 12-period being a little bit more of that resistance point to that upside on that move. So we are going to be looking at that being a little bit more of a resistance point. Pretty much, we are going to be looking at the 12-period coming in on the monthly right now at 303. So right about the 300 psychological, and then even the 26 is going to be coming in at 287. So likely we'll experience a lot more resistance up at that level. And then in addition to that, so if we do, for example, make a nice little price line right there, then that's pretty much what we're going to be looking at. So looking to the right or left here rather, and seeing it as a big point of closing support on this monthly. A lot of lower shadows dipping below, still maintaining support on top of this 12 period. And so now looking on the current, found it as several points of monthly resistance after finding it as nice support. So 300 is going to be our big level to look at. especially since we had that news catalyst and couldn't see a little bit more upside after the bulls did find this nice break above this 300 level back in the October candle. So now going to flip over here into the daily chart for Binance Coin BNB and look at the current most recent couple of candles that have closed. So we did just print recently the most recent daily candle, which still maintained price level support on top of the 26 period EMA or exponential moving average. So that's always a nice sign to see, especially after such a good bullish candle that does break through the 12 and the 26. So after seeing that huge smash, and if we look at volume as well, a little bit more of that increasing volume too. So nothing super significant, but obviously still a lot more compared to what we got back over the last couple of weeks. And especially after we have been back testing this 12 period EMA on the daily as resistance, finding enough bullish momentum to smash this to the upside, and now holding it on top of 26 is going to be a good sign. So now we're looking for follow through to ultimately test and run up and see a test of this 50 period EMA, which currently for that is coming in at a price of 263.8. So that would be right on top of that big 260 resistance line that we are looking at. So if we can't even run up and maintain a close, despite it being below the 50 period EMA, as long as it does come in on top of this 260, that's going to be another really bullish sign for the bulls as well. So next thing I want to talk about with regard to the current daily setup also is that if we actually look at a trend line, you can see a very nice recent trend line that has broken with multiple attempts. So we have a few attempts here, couple touches here, and also finding, again, another touch before actually running up and smashing this, confirming it. So we are looking at a very nice confirmation signal of being able to see a little bit more upside. So unless the current daily just completely reverses and backtraces to ultimately test this level, then we would be looking at support pretty much coming in right above 250 down to ultimately 245. But so still, nonetheless, anytime we can break a trend line that does look so strong to the downside, that's a very good sign. So to see a big, nice candle with a big, huge body, small upper wick shows that not much selling pressure was coming in on the daily. And then being able to hold it with such a small body. So if we actually talk about the magnitude of this current candle that just recently closed on the day, you can see that if we look at a potential body upside, we're looking at about effectively 1% compared to the previous bullish candle that closed was about over 5%. So you can see roughly about 20% of the size of the body, which is always a good sign to see such a strong move to the upside, holding very nice support, and then looking like we're going to see a little bit more bullish upside right now. So now one thing I do want to point out and talk about is that if we look at the overall picture for this most recent move for BNB, and if we turn on the volume profile visible range, VPVR, which is essentially just the volume based on price levels instead of based on time like we find for the volume at the bottom of the screen. So right now, this is looking like a big point of, looks like a big point of center of mass right now coming in just shy of 280. So we know that there's going to be a lot of resistance up overhead at that level, and then even up to that $300 psychological target like we have talked about, which is still extremely strong. So we know that this whole zone that we're seeing right now for BNB is going to be a very big zone that I would ultimately anticipate prices to get stuck at for quite some time, which quite frankly would be a very good bullish sign and would be of benefit, just because simply for the fact that we would be establishing this whole zone and level as a longer term of support, which does mean that once we ultimately break through it, then we would be seeing it provide a little bit more of that support since it is very resistive in this overall zone. So that's kind of the one takeaway and caveat to that. And those are some of the big, strong levels that we're going to be looking at up overhead, and kind of some of the reasons that we're considering basically 280 up to the $300 mark to be extremely resistive. So unless we actually do get a lot more bullish volume and follow through, then I would anticipate seeing a little bit of a struggle from the bulls to get stuck up in that zone, which ultimately would put us at a lower high compared to where we topped out prior to the most recent dump when we were seeing Binance get scrutiny for all of the reserves and things like that. So price high for that is 317.6. So as you can see, still a little bit higher than if we do get stuck up at 300 psychological. But things can ultimately change pretty quickly in this overall crypto space, so it's not impossible to ultimately reach that level. But right now, that is the overall plan, and what I'm thinking we're going to be looking at right now for BNB is simply just a move up to test some of those resistance points and also test some of the EMAs up higher on this weekly chart. So that's what I'm going to be expecting here over the coming days and weeks. And as always, would love to know everyone's thoughts down in the comment sections below. So make sure to drop me a note down there, and love getting back to all of you down there. With that, though, that actually is going to go ahead and wrap up this little update on BNB. Kind of a good thing that there's not a whole ton to talk about, because we're really looking like one of the better performers right now of the overall crypto space. So still a good sign overall, and a lot of good things still to come out of BNB. But ultimately, short term, we have talked about our targets. So yeah, anyway, if you did find value in the show, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe button. As always, do appreciate all the continued love and support. It means so much. Stay safe, take care, everyone, and I'll catch you back in the next video.